one of the things I always think about high holidays is what people have been thinking about all year, right? And we're always trying to tag what is that thing that they've been thinking about that they're coming to the shul. And so one of the things I kept thinking about this year is not just the Sheryl Sandberg media blitz over writing about Shloshim, but one of the things she did when she wrote about Shloshim. First of all, the amount of press it got was extraordinary. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. I don't know for you, but for me, to see Jewish wisdom so in the world. Like it was as if it was nothing. She's like, I'm the president of Facebook and I'm observing Shloshim, and they were like in the same breath. There was something very powerful about that, and that the world was responding to it, retweeting, reposting. Everyone was like, oh, this is as normal as can be. And as small as we are as a people, there was something very extraordinary about it. The other thing I thought was about her courage to share that and to speak in Jewish language, because there's always sort of this sense that I'm a public figure. If I'm too Jewy, then people are going to be pulled away. And if I'm not Jewy enough, like, what am I really standing for anyway? And she seemed to really speak right to the place of that intimacy. One of the things I really loved about what she said, and which we didn't sort of highlight, or that the Facebook post didn't repost so often, was that she was very prescriptive when she talked about it. I'm assuming everybody read it, right? If you haven't, this is the quick format. Sheryl Sandberg's husband died. Oh, I'll tell you really quick, so forgive me. Sheryl Sandberg's husband died in a freak accident when they were in Mexico, I believe, on a treadmill. Unexplained, very random. And after her Shloshim, she wrote a piece and that got retweeted, and reposted over 1,000 different places. So that's the backstory. But in the actual piece that she wrote, what was so interesting was that she was very prescriptive. And if you remember, she gave very clear instructions. One of the things she said to people was, stop asking, how are you? When you're grieving, stop asking people, how are you? She said, ask them instead, how are you today? Another thing she said to people was, don't insist that it will be okay. Rather, live with the discomfort that it won't be okay. And she was very prescriptive, and it's so interesting to me that very often leaders nowadays, in their efforts to be so politically correct and to be so fair and unbiased, are afraid to be that prescriptive. And what I see more often or not with rabbis, because I do travel a lot, is that when we're showing our wisdom, when we're looking at the text, what we want to show is all the good stuff. Because God forbid we showed some bad stuff and then people would come back with us, this is why I'm not Jewish, or this is why I don't come to shul. And so there's like this inhibition to show that which is kind of ugly about us. So what I wanted to do today is I brought 4 texts. We're going to go through them somewhat rapidly, and we can break them down. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm happy to break them down very detailed on a Skype session. I'm happy to put that together. But the reason I want to do it a little more quickly is I want you to have a lot of Homer. Because any one of these texts on their own could be a sermon. They could be a little piskaot, because I don't know about you, but high holidays, the sermons are one thing, but all those intermediate conversations that you have to plug in something cute and cool that resonates, that people want to stay in the attention, are almost as difficult. They take a lot of time. I used to say I have to write 5 sermons, and then I have to do 60 of these compelling, exciting vorts over 60 seconds. And in some ways, they were very taxing. So any of these can be used for a sermon, but a lot of them can be used just for a little sort of snip for people to think about. And I wanted you to give all of them. So what we're going to look at is we're going to take Sheryl Sandberg as our baseline and how she was prescriptive and unafraid to be prescriptive. And we're going to use that as our basis of what if we were prescriptive this year? What if we weren't so politically correct and we said something that actually angered people or disturbed them and made them truly uncomfortable? Could we sit with their discomfort? Now, we don't want to cause a whole rebellion in our synagogue. I've been there, I know what it looks like, right? But actually, could we sit with the discomfort of them not agreeing with the text and taking them through that? So that's our backdrop. So I want to look at a text you probably know for the first one. Some of these, oh, yes, absolutely. Sorry, Sharon, did everybody get, oh, no. So it'd be hard to look at it if you don't have it. Sharon, are you hesitating? I'm sorry. So some of these texts you might be more familiar with, and some you might be less familiar with. But some of them, I'm hoping that the way that we're looking at them might be something that you've never looked at them in that way. And obviously, that's what we do as rabbis, try to look at the text in a way that is new and novel. And it's often what I experience is when I'm learning with another teacher is when I actually get the insight to look at the text a different way. And I was learning this text with Amy Kalmanovsky in Lenox about 2 months ago. Amy Kalmanovsky is a Bible scholar at JTS, and she was talking about Jezebel as being the caricature of a woman trying to overtake power. When we were studying it, I came to this and ultimately to what I want to begin teaching you today. So this is from Kings 1, chapter 21, verse 1 through 3. Let me just give you context for a moment. If you remember, there's Ahab, I just forgot for a second. So Ahab is the king, and his wife is Jezebel. And if you remember, right preceding this story, there is a vineyard, and Ahab says, I would like to purchase this vineyard to buy a vegetable garden. Now, right there should be a little bit of problems in your head. First of all, why would a king need to purchase? If you're the king, what do? Take it over. Yeah, take, right? And the second thing should be a little bit of a highlight, which is what? A vegetable garden. I mean, it's a little of all the things. Like, if you're the most powerful king and you're like, by the way, I'm going to be gardening in the afternoon, it doesn't really make you sound like you have the authority of a master. So the backdrop of this story is that Ahab goes to Nahab and he says, I want to purchase this land and I want to build a vegetable garden. And what does he say? No. Absolutely not. Now, what's curious about that, just for the get-go, if the king comes to you, you don't say no to the king, okay? So here's where the story gets, I think, very interesting. So Ahab comes back to his wife, Jezebel, and he's not eating, and he's not sleeping, and he's completely what we would understand as depressed. I'm going to look at it in English for a second. We can look at it in the Hebrew in a second. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, why is the spirit so sullen? And why aren't you eating? So what's the first thing she's doing? She's coming to him and she's asking him, what's the cause of this depression? Now, we're not going to go into this today, but what you have to know about the story is how the actual events went down. He does not repeat them to her in the same way. And there's a lot of backstory to why that is, but of course, he doesn't want to look like an idiot to his wife, being like, I went to Navod and I asked him, I want to buy a vegetable garden, and he said no, and now I'm coming home and I'm feeling a little depressed about it. So he doesn't give her all that backstory, but instead he says to her, because I spoke unto Navod the Israelite, and said unto him, give me thy vineyard for money, or else, if it please thee, I will give thee another vineyard for it. So he's retelling the story, not exactly as it went down, but he's saying, I went to him, I asked him if I could buy his vineyard. He said no. I told him I'd give him a different vineyard. And he answered, I will not give thee a vineyard. So now this is, remember the context, Ahab saying to his wife Jezebel. Here's where it gets really good. And Jezebel, his wife, says to him, doesn't thou govern the kingdom of Israel? Like, it's a reasonable question. Like, you're the king. Take the land. Stop with the bargaining. Stop with the depression. You're the king. Be, for lack of a better word, be a man. Or I would say be a woman, right? Arise and eat bread. She could go eat. Stop with this. And let thy heart be merry. And here's the clincher. I will give thee the vineyard of Navot. So what is she doing? What's the problem here?
She's taking away his power.
She's
emasculating him.
Totally emasculated him. Right? I call it the fix-it model, right? I'm going to come in here and fix it for you because clearly you can't fix it yourself. Now, you tell me all the different problems with that. There's no secret message here.
Well, it's not gonna make him feel better.
Right, first it's going to actually increase his depression, right? If you suddenly feel like you can't do something and the person that is supposed to believe in you the most actually acknowledges that, that's not like, I'm your biggest cheerleader. That's the opposite. It's like, really, you can't do this? I'll take care of it. Good. What's another problem?
No, she doesn't even give him the sense of being empowered. Doesn't even, give some framework to say, hey, you can do this. No encouragement, no confidence building.
Right, there's no confidence building, and she also kind of robs him of the opportunity to fix it himself. Right? The minute you say to someone, I'll fix it for you, the assumption is, you can't fix it yourself, I will take care of it. So it's very diminishing. Go ahead, tell me your name too.
I'm Dahlia. She's validating his lack of self-confidence.
Right, beautiful. Right, she's saying to him, you're depressed, you don't want to eat, go eat. But really, you should be depressed. You don't have the qualities to be the king, and I'll take it for you. Go ahead, tell me your name.
David.
Hi.
It also doesn't quite maybe get to the root of what the actual problem is. There's no exploration of maybe his response doesn't quite fit what actually happened, and there's something else going on that's causing him to feel this depression.
Right, there's no room for dialogue. Because why is she acting out of what I call the fix-it model? Why is she acting so abruptly with, I'll fix it, I'll take care of it, I'll get the vineyard? What's driving her? Good. Power. What else? Control. Good. If her husband is the king and he can't even get a vineyard and she has to jump in, what do you think she's feeling?
Incompetent. She's also questioning his competency.
Who did I marry? Right? I'm supposed to be married to the king and he can't even get a vegetable garden going with a vineyard? Like, he can't even take that. So she not only emasculates him, but what's driving her need to fix it?
Fear of her place in the world.
Fear of her loss of place in the world, right? If this is who I'm supposed to be married to, this is shameful. I'm embarrassed. I don't want to have a discussion about this. I want this to go away. And if it goes away, then somehow it should be solved. Go ahead, Sherre.
Just another lens. Maybe he's battling that he's so ethical in this case. I don't know about his entire personality, but because he's ethical, he doesn't get what he wants. And that he's struggling with that conflict because I'm the king, I should get what I want, but I'm ethical, I don't want to steal land. So I don't get what I want. And if she were a good partner and friend and as ethical as him, she would meet him there, and the language he used before was great, comfort him where he's at.
I think that's a reading. The only thing I would say is that he retells the story to make himself look better when he tells it to her. So I think that when his retelling, he already has shame about the whole situation and his powerlessness. And one of the things we notice from her is she cannot tolerate that she's married someone so powerless. And instead of giving him the opportunity to actually dialogue and possibly solve it himself or give him the tools, she jumps in with, I got it. You go eat, have a little matzo ball soup, and I'll go fix it. Now, the reason I bring this first text up is how often we're faced with a problem and the immediate response is, I'll fix it. I got it. Because the fact of the matter is, I don't want to hear the dialogue. I don't want to process. My time is limited. I don't want to sit there and hear all the different sides. But what we do when we run in to fix it is we rob that person of the opportunity to do it themselves. There's something I read that I thought was incredibly relevant to this, is that when you say, I am going to fix this, it's about narcissism. It's about saying, I know better than you, and you really are that incompetent.
It strips some dignity away, too, from the other party.
And it strips their dignity away. And so often, in our own discomfort to sit with our shame and what we don't like about the situation, we become what's called a rescuer. I'll fix it because I cannot tolerate the discomfort of this moment. So the first question I would pose is, how can we live in discomfort? How can we continue to live in discomfort and not try to fix things for people? And what would that mean for ourselves? What kind of shame would we have to live with? What kind of embarrassment would we have to live with? Because the fact, and guilt, because if she actually said to him, you know what, I believe in you, but this is going to be hard and I got to give you some tools and we got to talk it out.
We rabbis are fixers.
right? We're professional fixers,
Absolutely.
right? People come to us with a problem and we're professional fixers, but what if we could sit there in the discomfort? And what if we could tell our congregants, when someone comes to you in pain, don't fix them. Just be with them and let them fix themselves, because when you do, you're being a narcissist. I work with groups, grieving groups, and we have like 12 people, and I break them down into these sessions where they have to look one-on-one and talk to each other about their grief. And one person talks for 5 minutes, and the other person listens. And I give very strict rules at the beginning. First, confidentiality. Second, you cannot fix. I cannot tell you, every time I go around and what am I checking for? I know exactly what you should do.
Yes.
Now, the irony of this is that everybody in the group has experienced tremendous loss, and they're there because they want some sort of way to come to grips with their loss, but yet they know exactly what everybody else should do. So the first thing is, what if you weren't Jezebel? What if you didn't try to fix and you could learn to sit with the discomfort? How powerful that would be for yourself and for your congregants. And also a message to send to them. So in the same vein, let's look at the second one. And as I said, we're going to go a little speedy. So, oh, sure, go ahead. Sure, absolutely.
Long ago, when I was an assistant rabbi and kind of learning the trade, I had a great senior rabbi. I worked with a lady, husband died, and it was I got called first, I went over late at night, and then he came over. And I noticed over and over again, just saying that it's going to be all right, it's going to be all right. And I thought to myself at the time, that was not the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
So she will survive and go on. And I said, but she lost her husband. She's married for 50 years, and she's now going to be a widow, and it happened suddenly. And it wasn't even, and I thought a lot of rabbis like to say that.
Why do you think they like to say that? I think you're 100% right.
Oh, I just see a woman sitting there crying in misery.
It's going to be all right. How often are we guilty of saying that? Because it soothes something within our discomfort. This person is a wreck before us, and by soothing him, it's like, it's going to be all right. It takes away the discomfort of being with them in their total discomfort. And I want to say that one of the most important things we do as a rabbi is sit with people in their discomfort and do nothing. Go ahead. Deborah, right?
I
Dahlia,
would
sorry.
actually add to doing nothing. I work in hospice.
Great.
And especially when we're dealing with the death of a younger person, I find it powerful to say, this isn't okay.
Right.
And it's okay to not be, it's okay for this situation not to be okay. It doesn't have to get better.
Oh, good. That was a perfect transition. I think that's exactly right. So let's look at the second text. Oh, sorry, Arthur.
Well, there was one case where this young woman a teenager was dying of cancer. She's in the hospital, and it's a Catholic hospital. So she wants to know, Rabbi, what's going to happen to me after I die? And so the Catholic priest has an answer for that woman, for that girl. I didn't have an answer, because after you die, I can't say you're going to go to Jesus, or death is better than life. So in a sense, I felt really inadequate to deal with this, but I recognize that Judaism doesn't have all the answers like Christianity might.
So Arthur, I would pose to you, and I know you each have a narrative, and I want to make sure that I can hear them all, but not in this moment, because I want to be able to look at, so you have a lot of content. But I think looking at when we feel inadequate and what we're doing to comfort is for us and not for the other. And how often that happens, and actually to communicate that to other people, because people don't know how to comfort people when they're suffering, and they think they should be all wise, and they go to their rabbi, and their rabbi says something like, I have answers, but they aren't the authority of their rabbi. And in fact, what could we really model for them? Ambiguity, disappointment, sadness, suffering. So let's look at the second text. This is from Menachot 29b. Most of you might be familiar with this text. And again, I try to bring texts that are not so obscure, that I don't like to bring texts that are so obscure that people are like, I've never heard of this, I've never found it. I want you to look at a text in a new way. So if just the backstory of this is, if you remember, Moshe ascended the heavens, he found the Holy One, blessed be he, sitting and attaching crowns to the letters, right? This was God literally attaching crowns to the letters of the Torah. He said before him, Master of the universe, who is staying your hand? He said to him, there's one man who will exist after many generations. You know the story. And Akiva, the son of Yosef, is his name. So in many generations, Akiva will be here. I just want you to draw this picture in your mind for a second. God is like medactic attaching the crowns, like as detailed work as you can possibly do. Just keep that in the back of your mind. So Akiva will come. He said before, Master of the universe, show him to me. So what's Moses' question? We know what's going to happen. He's going to show him. But why does he say, show him to me? Show me Akiva. What's he asking? This isn't a trick question. Proof. He wants proof. He wants to know. You're telling me this is how it's going to look. Show it to me. So God says, he said to him, turn backwards. He went and he sat at the end of the 8 rows. We could talk about turn backwards for 100 years, but we're not going to talk about it. He went and sat at the end of the 8 rows of students in Rabbi Akiva's Beit Midrash, and he had no idea what they were talking about. So just again, picture Moses goes. He says, show this to me, what's going to happen. He goes to the back of the row. He's 8 rows back. He has no idea what Akiva is talking about. Can you imagine for a moment what Moshe felt like? Just take it. I schlepped these people across the desert. I schlepped up that mountain. It was hot. It was dry. I come back down. They have a golden calf. They're completely misbehaving. All I've heard from them for 40 years is complain, complain, complain. I don't even get to go into the land. And now he goes into this room. He's 8 rows back. He's not even in the front row. He hasn't even merited the front row. He's 8 rows back. He has no idea what's going on. How would you feel? Forgotten. As soon as he got to another thing, his students said to him, our teacher, from where do you learn this? He said to them, it is the law that was taught Moshe Sinai. Now, love this. Moshe's 8 rows back. He's like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And Akiva says, where do we learn this? We learn this from Moses, our teacher. And you could just imagine Moses being like, no, you don't. You don't learn that from me. I have no idea what you're talking about. And the impulse to run and stand and say, you don't know anything, right? That's not what I taught. He returned and came before the Holy One. So there's something quite beautiful. Moses did not, at that moment, whether he had the possibility or not, because remember, it's a God narrative, stand up and interject, but he goes back to God. And he says before him, Master of the universe, you have a man like this, and you're giving the Torah through me. And what does God say to him?
Chill out.
Shut up. Shut up. Now, there's something very sad about this, because what is Moses really asking for?
Compliment.
Okay, compliment, what else? Assurance, good. Explanation, right? He's asking God, Akiva's teaching this, saying it in my name. I have no idea what it means. Just tell me how this all went down. Just give me some sort of understanding of how the steps came to this. And what you tell me, God, is shut up. Let's read the story. This is what I have decided. Sorry, that was the end of the sugya. It says, be silent. This is what I've decided. He says before, Master of the universe, you have shown me his Torah, shown me his reward. He said to him, turn backwards. He turned backwards and he saw that they were tearing the skin with iron combs. Right? Akiva was dying in this very brutal way. He said to him, Master of the universe, such Torah and such reward? Right? Here this guy was teaching in the Beit Midrash and now he's dying the most gruesome, suffering death. He says to him, be silent. This is what I've decided. So first of all, there's a really interesting Joshua here about God in this sugya. Now, what's the problem with God? Why doesn't he want to explain to Moshe? Think of the obvious. Why doesn't he want to explain?
He doesn't have an explanation.
Exactly. This is a beautiful, important point that God here doesn't have an explanation. And if we're expounding God is all-knowing, God is all-powerful, which I don't. I'd rather sacrifice the idea of an all-powerful God to have a God that comforts me and isn't all-knowing. I'm willing to make that choice. But if we have that, here's an example. God doesn't know. And in this moment, they have what I would call competing interest. Moses is not saying, change this story. Moses is saying, just give me an explanation. And God is saying, No, shut up. God doesn't even have the chutzpah or even the courage, which you'll see in the next text, to say, I don't know.
Worse, he says, this is what I've decided.
This is what I've decided. It's like, are you a cruel and unusual God, or should I make sure you're a horrible and unforgiving God?
Right after this, it says, if you don't shut up, I'm going to destroy them.
Yes, I didn't even go there, right? And God even goes further in the next sugya and says, you know what, if you don't shut up, I'm actually going to destroy the world for this. God is so powerful in this moment that he does not know, and he cannot afford to give Moshe an explanation. Go ahead.
Sure, I've never thought about this text in this context.
Right, that's what I hope to do.
Right, which is the best part of what you're doing. But isn't Moses trying to maybe validate his own life, or rather death?
Beautiful.
Right, the sense that why couldn't he enter the land? So is it really about self-validation again, or is it about the actual
That's
future?
beautiful, Stuart. So it could be that maybe he didn't even need an explanation. Maybe he just needed some sort of validation that my life was not in vain. Either way, God didn't give it. And I often see this, hold on one second, Talia. I often see this with people when they come to us, we have competing interests. And I especially see it with funeral families. Someone is dying, and as you know better than I, when someone is dying, they're the most honest person you know, right? There's like no BS anywhere. And most of you know that I lost both my parents at a very young age, and both of them, and I buried many people, but both of them, while they were dying, there was no room for BS. And my mother, she liked a good facelift. I mean, she had a lot of BS vanity in her life, but at this point, she wouldn't even wear a wig. She was like, the scale of which she would be at all covered was gone. She was completely naked in the emotional and spiritual sense. And I find most people are like that. And we had 800 people come visit her while she was sick, and every person would say something about their interest. Like, don't think about this. Are you eating? This is not going to turn out the way you thought. It would be something to cover them. And every time they would leave, and not every single time because she was weak, she would say to me, why can't they just talk about my death? I'm dying. And I said, because they have competing interests, right? Your interest is to talk about the truth. I'm going to die soon. And their interest is to not talk about that. And that's exactly what's happening in this text. You have Moses saying, here's my interest, whether it's for validation, whether it's for just explanation. And then you have God being like, I'm not dealing with that. Because that is too painful for me to look at. And I see it all the time when people, you see it in the hospital all the time. Someone wants to talk about death, and what's their family doing? They want to talk about the will. They want to talk about how the person's going to survive. They're talking about anything but the death. And I think one of the things that's so beautiful about Menachot, this particular sugya, is that you can talk to someone totally honestly, even if it's the ugliest, most uncomfortable thing you don't want to talk about.
I go one step further in
Good,
hospice work is sometimes the family will say, don't mention hospice.
Yes.
Don't let them know that, they're dying.
And
And
you-
usually the person knows they're dying.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is so often like the family steps away and you come in as the rabbi and you could see this like sigh of relief, like, Rabbi, what the heck's going to happen when I die? Or suddenly all these questions that they've been protecting their family. And I really felt that with my mother. People would come in and she was protecting them from her imminent death. And it was taking a lot of time. And as she neared her death, I'll just say one more. As she neared her death, she would say, my mother was the most social person I've ever met in my life. Truly. Right? She was a stylist for Barney's. She had Madonna. She was the most social person I've ever met. And the last 4 months of her life, she was like, I don't want to see a person. Not because I don't love my friends and family, but because I cannot stand to take care of them anymore.
When somebody
Hold on one second, Arthur. I just want to give...
So, there's no question that you have this personal experience, and lots of people are like that, but I also see the other side sometimes.
Good.
Where the person doesn't want to talk about it because they're denying it themselves. I think I know there are times they will talk, I have a man saying, I lived a good life, I did, the children, grandchildren, etc. But I do see times that there are people who are afraid to admit what's going on.
I'm so glad you said that. 100%. There are times that are people... I'm 100% with you. If you take nothing away First of all, I'm so glad you said that because sometimes people can't hear it and they don't want to talk about it. And our job is not to bring them the truth, right? There's multiple truths in every story, and we don't have to bring them the truth as we know it. I mean, I'm going to say this later, but have you ever sat with a family and there's 4 kids and the father's died, and I say, describe your father, and I have 4 totally different stories. This was the greatest man that ever lived. This man was horrible, right? And I literally think to myself, how am I going to write this eulogy, right? Because this man lived like with multiple personalities. And what I've come to realize is that people have multiple truths. We have the truth of our life as we've lived it through the lens of our life. And sometimes, I love that you said that, sometimes we don't need to bring our truth to a situation. Sometimes we do. We need to have the honesty of saying, you know what, you are dying. But sometimes we also need to have the self-awareness to say, this person doesn't need my truth as I understand it. And often I answer to people, I don't know. I don't know when you die. And that's we're going to get to that text in a second and how you can use it.
No,
Go ahead,
when
Arthur.
this man came to you and said, what will happen when I die? And did you answer him by saying, I don't know what's going to happen?
Well, I'll leave that to you. I don't want to give you.
Unexplainable?
I'm not giving away the goods. Hold on.
First of all, I'm so sorry about what happened in your family.
Thank you.
I know this is not your main point, but is the theology or theodicy in Menachos, from your point of view, that even God doesn't know why people suffer?
Yes, I think you can make, as you can see, I'm bringing you a couple texts of which you can pull different angles from it. And so this second angle, among many, is that even God somehow doesn't know how to answer. So the fact that we would somehow have to know is an expectation that's unreal for us.
Nice.
So stop putting it on yourself that you need to know, because it's an unreal expectation because God doesn't even know. Sharon.
Just to add another layer, I
Good.
think part of the question is what is Moses looking for? Like he needs, God can't answer the question he's asking, but the question he's asking isn't really the question, right? He's feeling
Beautiful.
this depth of concern about how his own unworthiness, and he needs to be validated there instead of answering some existential question, which is what God can't answer.
Which is another Homer, which is another Josh, right? So often the question we're asking, and hopefully this is my rephrase, is not the question we want answered, right? And so often, how often do you sit in an office with someone and you talk for half an hour, and as they're walking out, they're like, oh, by the way, I can't have a baby. And you're like, what? Did we just spend a half an hour discussing this? Right? Because the question they came to was, are my kids going to have their bar mitzvah date in December or in December 12th or December 18th? Because I'm feeling weird about Hanukkah. And what they leave with is, I can't have a baby. Right? And so often people come with, they don't know the question. Or the question they're asking is a different one than we're answering. So I think that's another Josh from it. Beautiful. Good. Was there another hand? Sorry, Talia.
When you're reading this in the light that you're reading, it also connected to Job. When Job says, God's response is, are you the one that created the world? Did you make this breakers of the sea? And that sometimes, when we're asked a question we don't know how to answer, we just throw everything at the fan, or it's our own inadequacy that's showing through. And God here, I see a very insecure God, that God is troubled by what's happening, and so rather than admitting to it, God responds with anger.
Right, and to pull from that, how do we live with an insecure God is a question, but also how do we live with our own inadequacies?
How do we respond with ambiguity and we hate saying we don't know.
We hate saying we don't know, which brings it to you. You're my little transitioner, because look at the third one. Go ahead, Evan.
I'm thinking specifically of one individual who has been all her life rallying against God, and this would be fodder for her. So how do we deal with, in the situation where a person is suffering and saying, you can see it in the Bible, God is cruel in this case. This is cruel.
Right. The question is, if we're going to say to someone, and this is a larger discussion, and I do want to look at this, but one of the questions is, if we're going to say to someone who's really doubting God, oh no, God is great, I'm the biggest cheerleader, check out the Bible, we're big old liars, right? Because that persona in the Bible is not a good one. So if that's our methodology, is only show the good side of God, that's not going to work for us for very long. But if we can understand a different understanding of God than what we're presented in that sort of very typical thing, because often I find when people are challenging their belief in God, it's they're challenging some third grade notion that hasn't evolved into their adulthood. And so if I can give them a more expansive understanding of what theology is and what does it mean to understand God, and not relegate it to that small piece of the Bible, I might actually give them something more. Michael, can we pause? I'm sorry, I just want to look at this. I just want to make sure you guys get all the content that you need. So this is from Brachot. I love this text. I love this Gemara. So I'm going to give you background. This is about midnight. So it's about a time. So just to give you a little background, David, there's a story that David had a harp, and it would ring at midnight. And some say that he would study until midnight, and then at midnight the harp would go off, and then he would start praising God. He would start prayer. And that was the time. Other people say that he would study and that he never went to sleep. And then this would be an indicator, like an interruption to say, an alarm clock, study something else now. But for our sake, the reading is he was fast asleep. And they used to say he slept like a dove or something. And then when he woke, he was like a lion, like he was instantaneously awake. And the harp would wake him. So the harp is our alarm clock. The second situation is God says to Moshe, at midnight I will come and I will slay the firstborn. And the story is Moses goes back to Pharaoh, and when he repeats the story, he doesn't say at midnight. What does he say? About midnight, like around midnight. And the Gemara asks, why does he say that? Why doesn't he just say at midnight? And Moses' response, as you'll see, is perhaps the astrologers or the timekeepers of Pharaoh are going to keep their own time. And the time doesn't align, and then they will call me a liar. So to prevent them from calling me a liar, I'm going to jump in and say, give or take midnight, right? Like around midnight. So here's the situation. Rabbi Sherre said Moses certainly knew the exact time of midnight, meaning he certainly knew the time of midnight and the time that God would slay the firstborn. And David also knew it too. David clearly knew that what was midnight and when it was time to switch from either sleeping to wake or from Torah study to prayer. Since David knew it, why did he require a harp? There's a long discussion in the Gemara about what's the service of the harp, what's the point of the harp. But for our moments, let's set that aside. You can look at Brachot, and also if you look in Steinsaltz, they have a really nice description of it. In order that he may be aroused from his sleep. So they're saying, no, in this case, he was fast asleep, that harp was an alarm clock. And then he knew to get up and start studying. And since Moses knew it, what object had he in saying about midnight? If he knew it was midnight, like why would he say, give or take? Moses thought that perhaps Pharaoh's astrologers would err and say, Moses is a liar. So here's where it gets really good, right? Because I love like texts where you're like, this is really. It says, for a teacher has said, teach thy tongue to say, I don't know, lest thou be led to falsehoods and apprehended. So the first thing is interesting is the stum of the Gemara is critiquing who? The greatest leader of all time, right? The stum of the Gemara is saying, Moses, what were you thinking? Just say, I don't know. Why give this sort of estimation, right? So there's really interesting about that is who's critiquing who. I think that's the first point. But second, what's it really saying?
Don't be afraid to say that you don't know.
Okay.
Just be quiet.
I hear this all the time. People say all the time, I'm not afraid to say I don't know, and yet I never hear people say it. Everybody says, it's really important to say I don't know, and yet I'm rarely in a conversation where I've heard someone say I don't know, including myself. There's some arrogance that it's better to say, well, I'm going to couch it in around midnight, I'm going to protect myself a little bit, because the value of saying I don't know is a submission of total humility. And if you think about how many times people around you have said I don't know, it's not a lot. Right? When you actually say I don't know, it is an act of humility, and it's something that Moses couldn't even do in this situation. And if we're asking people to be like Moses, that's one thing. But if we're asking people to be their best self, maybe even someone not superior, but better than they would see themselves as Moses, because you're not Moses, then here's a perfect example. Go beyond what Moses could do. Actually say, I don't know, because it's actually quite powerful. So this is the linkage between Menachot too. You can see that? Good. So let me just go to the last one. I think we have just a couple minutes. Okay. This is the Midrash from Genesis. I'm giving you just a lot of text because I want you to have it. What happens is God comes to Sarah and he says, you're going to have a baby in old age. And what does she do? And then what does she do? She says, have you seen him? Have you seen my husband? That old man? No way is he having children. I mean, I could just imagine her.
Well, it's not even he having children. I'm having pleasure.
Right.
It's worse.
She says, now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah the manner of women. I love sort of and Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I'm waxed old, shall I have the pleasure, my Lord being old also? Like she's deriving pleasure that this guy, are you kidding? We're not having sex. Right? Forget that. There's no possible way. And the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of surety bear a child? Who am I old? So what is the retelling of the story? She's too old, right? The story was, she said to God, no way, that guy, I'm not having sex with him. He is old and shriveled and small. And she, instead, the text comes back and says, what she said is, I am old. So the Midrash comes in, and it says, and the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, seeing that am I old? By the way, I'm a little bit perfectionist. Midrash Rabbah has the Hebrew of this, but I like this program called Safaria.org, and it didn't have it, and I was so annoyed because then I would have to cut and paste, and then it would look really sloppy. So if you need to know where it is in the Hebrew, I've got it for you. Bar Kapra says, great is peace, for even Scripture made a misstatement in order to preserve peace between Abraham and Sarah. Thus it is written, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of surety bear a child? It does not say, since my Lord is old, but seeing that I am old. So the Midrash comes back and says, no. This was God being a wonderful God, making shalom bayit, right? This was God intervening and being a wonderful God. I think it is a lovely reading. I actually don't think it's true. What do you think actually is the problem? Why would someone intervene in a conversation between two other people that they had no business being in?
People do that.
Of course they do it. We call it triangulation. There's a great book that everybody had to read in rabbinical school called Generation to Generation. If you haven't read it, then you didn't go to rabbinical school. But the truth is...
We went to a different rabbinical.
Or you went to a different rabbinical school, forgive me. But the truth is God intervenes in this conversation because what is God fearing? He's afraid they won't have a baby if he doesn't intervene.
The legacy, the descendancy.
That his whole plan will go awry. So
The future of
the whole seeds of the future will go awry. The whole plan will fall apart if he doesn't intervene because he doesn't trust Abraham and Sarah enough that they can actually have a disagreement and overcome it. Because what would it have looked like if God didn't intervene? And I ask that question often. What would it look like if I didn't intervene in that conversation? I see it all the time. My husband's having an argument with my son, and I'm right in it. Who am I? Let them solve it. Because what's driving me is the belief that I'm right. That I know better how this conversation, but what I'm telling to them is I don't trust you to handle this on your own. So the message that I'm sending is you are incompetent. And if it looks like throughout these texts that I'm saying this is sort of a laissez-faire attitude, I'm not. What I'm saying is that often we're intervening for our own purposes and not for the other. For the last few years, I've been studying Musar with Ira Stone, and if you haven't had a chance to learn with him, I suggest you do. But the essence of Musar, which is very crass, that I'm going to say in one sentence, is that we're here to serve the other. But I find in my own life, in board meetings, in congregations, especially in the Jewish community, it's not the wisdom, it's what Jews do to it, is that we're over-intervening because we can't tolerate the discomfort. And what would it look like if we actually took a step back and let Sarah and Abraham work it out? I would conjecture maybe they would have had a stronger relationship. Because if she said to him, when God came to me and said, you're old, and I laughed and then said, well, you're old too, can you imagine what a laugh they would have had over that? Tone. Beautiful tone, right? She would have said, I thought God was nuts. I'm old, you're old, we're old, right? Who has a baby? That could have been the basis for a whole newfound sense of connection. But God could not tolerate what was not in it for him. A different reading of the text, you can totally disagree with me. Go ahead. A couple closing comments.
President Roosevelt didn't intervene in World War II to save the Jews in the Holocaust, and 6 million Jews died. So I think most of us spend a lot of our time preaching interventions. We have Jewish World Watch today. We have other things which say we ought to intervene. So I've taught this text about God intervening for him and Sarah. I love that text.
I love that text, and I think it's a very good text.
Which is the old way. I mean, which is God was willing to even tell a white lie for Shalom Bayit.
I think you can absolutely read that because it was for Shalom Bayit, it was for an ulterior purpose. Sometimes people don't need to hear the entire truth. I think that is the traditional reading.
I think you're right. There are times that people jump in, that they don't let people solve their own problems. Absolutely. But there's times that people can't solve their own problems. And then what's our...
So it takes me right back to Sheryl Sandberg, where we started. If you notice, people wrote on her, thank you for sharing, but very few people wrote a prescriptive, and now, Sheryl, you should do this. If you remember, most of the comments were, you know what, thank you for sharing, thank you for giving me this awareness about Shloshim, because she did not write it because she wanted people to fix her. She wrote it because she wanted to air this discomfort and somehow work it through and let all of the world be her support. So often, I think people don't know how to say, I don't want you to fix me. I don't want you to have all the answers. I don't want you to say, I got it, or shut up, but they want you to say, I need to say this, and be my support. Hit like. Put a comment that says, I'm with you. I think people are hungry for that more than we ever imagined. And the more that we live in this age of where we really have to know everything because all the information's out there, so if there's a question, we should go to the internet and we should get it, I think it makes the import of saying, I don't know, of standing back and letting people find their own wisdom even more powerful. I wish you all Shana Tova.